I'm professor of psychology at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in Israel. I am both a cognitive psychologist and a philosopher of psychology. And I've been studying the phenomenology of human consciousness, ordinary consciousness and also non-ordinary consciousness.
But these are all very scientific terms. For ordinary people, you are a psychologist, you're interested in how we think, what we do, how this thing on top of our body works.
Yes, it's very true, how the mind works. I'm not a clinical psychologist, I'm an academic psychologist. And I've been working on thought processes, also on creativity, and on this phenomenon that we are aware, which now we are talking, the two of us, and it's a day-to-day happening, but the fact that we are aware is quite puzzling, it's quite mysterious. So I've been working on this for many years, but and I also like to travel in the world. I've traveled a lot.
And you've written a book, and the book was called Antipodes of the Mind.
Yeah.
And when I first saw it, what is this? Is it about Australian mind or what?
Yeah. It's about ayahuasca, which is now it's more known in the world. I found it more than 15 years ago. It was less known. It's a strong psychoactive brew of the Amazon. I just began a moment ago to say that I like to travel, and it was totally by coincidence that I got to this, traveling in South America. And getting to this, it occurred to me that what the subject matter here is consciousness. Because at the time, all the academic literature on ayahuasca was either in the natural sciences, botany, pharmacology, or in anthropology, because ayahuasca in the Amazonian tribal culture is the central of those indigenous cultures. So anthropologists have studied the music, the cosmology, the rituals. It's always taken in a ritual.
There was some literature about it from people like William Burroughs, the Yahé letters.
No. This is a freaky literature. No, but the top people was, for example, the Colombian anthropologist Geraldo Reichel Dolmatov is no longer alive. But the amazing thing is that the top experts on ayahuasca, the scientific experts, didn't have first-hand experience with it. And the topic was considered to be a topic of anthropology, because that's what happens to the Indians.
Explain what is anthropology? It's the science of what those
other cultures.
Indigenous people, like in this case the Indians of Brazil.
Yes, not only of Brazil, of the Amazon, of Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, and also Brazil and Bolivia. And both the anthropologists and the ethnobotanists thought and wrote that those people see like serpents and jaguars and big birds, because this is the fantastic imagination of the primitive people. I came to ayahuasca not knowing anything of this literature, having no prior knowledge about Amazonian culture, but I saw the same things. So, and when I came back to my own world, being kind of an academic person, I started to read about it. And
when you say the same things, what are the same things? You say jaguars?
Yes.
You say animals, colors? But do you see them? Do you see them in the jungle, or how did you see them? In a ritual environment where you took this brew?
Yeah. And I cannot say that I saw exactly the same thing. Nobody can take a picture of what is in your mind, but the same semantic categories. So I did see jaguars and serpents and amazing, fabulous palaces made out of gold and precious stones. And these were when I read the anthropological literature, these are the same categories of things. And I was thinking, this is not the fantasy of primitive people. This is the mystery of human consciousness, human, not Indian, not Amazonian, human consciousness. So I thought two things. First, that the subject matter here is not anthropology. In other words, it's not the study of foreign civilizations, but the study of the human mind, which was my profession for already 25 years. And the second, I understood that one cannot understand what is going on here without trying it yourself. Because all these so-called the world expert on ayahuasca. Today the situation is different because there are young students of doctorate and with personal experience. But at that time, like 20 years ago, the top experts, the top academic experts, didn't have any personal experience with it. And I made the decision that if I want to understand what's going on, first of all, I have to go not as a researcher, but as a student, and to study it on myself. The situation was as if a person who has never heard music would write a book about music. Not a person who is not a composer, but a person who has never listened to music. Now this is ridiculous. So I went back to South America. I stayed there 2 years, mostly in Brazil and Peru, but also in Colombia and Ecuador. And I drank ayahuasca many times in different places, different geographical places, different ethnic groups, different kinds of rituals, both indigenous, mestizo, which means semi-indigenous, semi-Amazonian, semi-Christian, Catholic Brazilian churches that use ayahuasca as a sacrament. The drink is identical in all these places, but the rituals are different. And only after having taken it almost 70 times, I felt I begin to get and I started to interview people. I was returning to the Amazon at least once a year since then, and I interviewed hundreds of people on their experience. And on the basis of all this data that I collected, I began writing this book, which is like a cartography of the experience. Not each time, but over many times and a great number of people, what kind of things can be seen.
Okay. And what interests, of course, us is what generalizations could come out of it, because I understand that one person takes it, his liver might not be good, he might be worrisome or whatever, he has this experience in his life, but are there generalizations? And the word I would like you to ask is, are there archetypes in the ayahuasca, DMT experience that you recognize?
Now, two comments. I wouldn't call it DMT. I've never taken synthetic DMT, but I think it's very important.
Maybe you have to explain. DMT is the active chemical component that is in most of those drinks.
Yes, but there are other chemicals also, and I think it's just if you have a good French wine, you don't call it ethanol. You know, the molecule is ethanol, but it's a Chateau Lafite Rothschild. So the same with ayahuasca. The chemical is necessary, but it's not the whole story. It depends who prepared it. There are better ayahuascas and less. They're all good, but there are gradations. Also, you said archetypes. Archetypes is already a Western theoretical term invented by Jung. I have my other theoretical terms, but you asked about the substantial question you posed, our generalization, and that's the question. And the answer is definitely yes. If I look at the large numbers of people and of sessions, so several categories are much more frequent than others. And they, regardless of whether the person is Indian or not. Serpents, this is the most common category. Feline, which means large cats, but not lions, either jaguars or pumas. Architecture, palaces, temples, but fantastic architecture. Works of art, objects of magic, mythological creatures like half a human being, half an animal, celestial scenes, like the heavens open and the angels are coming, or beings of light are coming. These are the most common.
Okay, these are the common, but maybe once upon a time you met someone who has never been in contact with literature, pictures of this. Say someone who was in a monastery and was taking ayahuasca, not in any context related to the jungle.
Oh, of course.
Yes. Would they also have these?
Yes. We've met in Holland. I've lived in Holland for a year, a couple of years ago, and the answer is definitely yes. Not because I've been to a monastery, but I've met people, and I've been in sessions in Europe, not in the Amazon. People who have not known anything about it before, and the answer is definitely yes. definitely yes. I should say, however, that I was fortunate to have powerful visions from the beginning. Only through my research I discovered that there are many people who don't see anything. So when I say the most common, this is of course the most common out of the people who see. If there are people who don't see, I cannot do statistics on that. Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's in a way peculiar that an animal that only happens to be in the jungle, people don't report African images. They don't report Asian images.
Sometimes yes. Yeah, sometimes yes. Also, people report more common than either Africa or Asia. People report prehistorical animals. Quite a few. Quite a few.
Could it be that because these products that constitute ayahuasca, which are fine and it's a cooked product actually, that they contain information about the soil where they come from, in the sense that that is the jungle?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Essentially, there can be three lines of how to interpret this. One is involves like paranormal discovery. That this beverage makes people undergo a paranormal travel outside of space, outside time. This is what practically all the Indians believe, and also most Western people or non-Indian Brazilians, like from Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, who have had powerful experiences. This is so astonishing that people believe these other realities that exist somewhere.
Another dimension in general.
Or other realities. I don't believe. I don't believe in paranormality. The other alternative is something that you hinted a moment ago, like Jung, is that the deep layers of our own unconscious. This is offhand, a priori, it makes sense. However, I collected a large number of dreams. And with the same conceptual categorization, I counted what people see in dreams, in the dreams of everyday night. And it's completely different. In dreams, usually you see persons close to you, your father, your mother, your children, or little things that happened to you in the last day. Maybe you made a phone call and there was a number and the number re-enters into the dream. Nothing of the sort you find in ayahuasca. So it led me to conclude that the unconscious, the way psychoanalysis conceives the unconscious to be, is also not the answer. So I came up, and this is kind of the original part of my book, with a third option, that it's creativity, that we create it. Now, I came to this conclusion, actually...
That these images of jaguars and jungle, we created.
Yes, that I came to this idea once during an ayahuasca session, and I was guided through an exhibition, like a museum. And the exhibition it was of an entire civilization. It contained works of art, objects of everyday use, architectural models, technology. And it was like a civilization I never saw ever, either in my travels or in books, in film, nothing. And the other thing I observed about this whole exhibition, that it was coherent. It was not like one thing looked Asian, one thing looked Egyptian, another thing looked futuristic. It was a coherent, complete civilization. And I was thinking to myself, either indeed I'm now kind of flying outside of space to some other reality. I don't believe in it. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't believe in this. So the other logical option is that on the spot, my mind, not because I'm this particular individual, but because of the phenomenon, the amazing phenomenon of the human mind, my mind created the whole civilization on the spot. And this is what I believe.
But it was coherent in the sense there was an underlying cosmology that translated in symbols, in forms, in architecture, in the way...
works of art, in everyday utensils, yes. So I would say, just as actually human beings were made to to create culture. Like bees create honey, human beings create culture. Not every single human being is a creator of culture, but if God looks at this whole history of Homo sapiens, it made architecture, it made religion, it made philosophy, it made music. That's what humanity is. So with ayahuasca, but in actual life, you need very special, talented individuals. You need generations for it. With ayahuasca, it can happen. It doesn't happen to every person who drinks ayahuasca, but to many, it happens in a moment.
Yeah, but it happens to writers. There's Island is a book that comes to mind. There's many books about ideal or less ideal
Utopias,
societies,
yeah.
utopias, science fiction sometimes. But this is what writers do, and they spend a long time writing a book like that.
Yes.
You say you made that in an instant.
I don't want to say I made it. I would say it happened through my mind. I don't want to say I made it, but it happened to me. Yes. The other thing that happens very commonly with ayahuasca, and it is special to ayahuasca and not to other substances, is it makes some people, not everybody, but many people, it happened to me personally, it makes people sing. And the mouth
Makes you
sing. Sing.
Oh, sing! It makes you make sounds.
Not sounds, melodies, and beautiful melodies. And the mouth, you don't make a decision. The mouth opens, and there comes song. Melody, sometimes also with the text of the melody. When it happens, and it's a fantastic experience. Then you sing like an opera singer. And this is special to ayahuasca. The all of ayahuasca is, with the Indians, it's used for healing. And they say, el que can, in Spanish, el que canta, el que cura. He who sings is the one who cures, or the one who heals. And the healing is through the singing. They drink the ayahuasca, but the healing is the singing.
But that's, of course, also in yoga we know that breath is a healing way. If you sing with your heart, your body gets cured. Yeah.
Yes,
it's in many cultures.
Yeah, of course. And if you look at European languages like Roman languages, French, Italian, Spanish, you say cantare and encantamento, singing and chanting, and chant and enchantment is the same word. Yeah.
Even personality, persona. That's what Hans Cousteau says.
In theater, yeah. It's just
persona. It's how you express yourself in sound.
Yeah. So, and really, all the ayahuasca rituals, there's always music. Always music. The music can be different in different places. Usually without instruments, some places with instruments, but there's always music. Yeah.
But now, this is anecdotal, and then you try to come to generalities about what you think. But in your book, there's also some kind of rebalancing our philosophical thought. The philosophy of science there, of your science, what is psychology in the whole of our knowledge? Can you tell me about
Yes, but I should say that I have my own view of what academic psychology should be. It's a minority view. I'm not the only one, but it's a minority view. But I developed this view before I knew ayahuasca. I wrote a book on the psychology of, the philosophy of psychology, because all of academic modern psychology, coming from the United States, but also in the Netherlands, is based on the idea that the human mind is like an advanced computer, and all that we think, talking, every memory, perception is based on what is called underlying mental representations, which means symbolic structures inside the mind, and the application of computer-like operations upon these structures. And I wrote this book. It's very technical. I cannot get into
this
here.
is Marvin Minsky's idea. The brain is a computer made of meat.
Yeah. And I actually, you mentioned Minsky. He was one of my teachers, and I grew up academically in this academic world, but not. I changed over the years. It took me time, but I changed, and I don't believe in it. And I think the method of the human beings are not primarily designed to process information like a computer, but rather to act in the world. And the method to study this, to my mind, which comes from the continental Europe, not from the America, is phenomenology. Looking at large pieces of behavior, for me, the behavior I studied was language. So looking at language and not asking what is the computations there, but what are the regularities in the phenomenology of language. Afterwards, I applied this to internal monologues, like you have, everybody has it every day. All of a sudden, you have like conversation going silently, of course, inside your head. You're not speaking, but there are sentences running in your head. So I collect first my own, then I collect this also from hundreds of people, and I try to build kind of a grammar of those internal conversations. And it is.
And are you referring to internal conversations that are one directional, or conversations between parts or subparts of the mind? The one that we might call the judgmental part?
No. One linear. It's linear. Yeah. Let's say not problem solving. Not now I think. No. Let's say
discourses more than.
You sit on the bus and you look at a train of thought. Exactly. I call them thought sequences. Yeah, a train of thought. Exactly. And usually there are about 6 or 8, blah, 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 and it stops. That's it. And I found, I'm not a clinical psychologist. I don't care about the content, but I look at the grammar, at the structure of that, and there are regular patterns. Later, with the same technique, I studied images. Images don't come usually spontaneously, so I asked people to close their eyes and let go and report the images that go. So using these techniques that I developed before I even heard about ayahuasca, I took these phenomenological techniques and applied them to ayahuasca. Yeah, and this is my study was the first and still the only academic cognitive psychological study of ayahuasca. There have been studies, neuropsychological studies of ayahuasca, medical psychology to see if people become healthier, psychologically healthier with ayahuasca. This is not my line of research. My line was to see what is happening from a cognitive point of view. What is happening?
So, but you're going down to building blocks of construction. Now, linguists like Ivan Illich, there's the people that have written a lot about how language and grammar shapes our lives. How our thoughts, but also our lives. The idea, what is a woman? The word woman has a certain connotation, shapes our society. What you're saying now, that these people, that the grammar, the logical sequence in ayahuasca experience, another experience gives you an understanding of how our mind works.
It's not a yes and no question. It shows us other parts or other qualities of the mind that usually as scientists we don't think of if we look only at ordinary states of consciousness. Like my book, the idea of this came from Aldous Huxley. Who was an intellectual, a writer who took mescaline and then wrote 2 essays that came afterwards.
Doors of Perception.
And the other one, which was published together, Heaven and Hell. Doors of Perception is more a personal account of his own mescaline experience in one day, and the Heaven and Hell is more of a intellectual, philosophical, literary criticism, reflections after that. So they go together, these two.
Yeah, but people have to understand that Aldous Huxley wrote also Perennial Wisdom. He has a very deep comparative knowledge of all religions.
Very true. But he took mescaline when he was 59. It was 3 years after he published the Perennial Wisdom. Yeah, he was not a 20 years old boy. And Heaven and Hell, he begins to say that, like in geography, first people knew Asia, the Middle East, the Northern Africa and Europe, and then they discovered America, and then West America, and South America, and in Australia. The same with the mind. First we know only our waking normal consciousness. Then we discover our dreams, regular dreams. And then if we go far away to the after the oceans of the mind, we discover the antipodes of the mind. That's how it took my name is homage to Huxley, the name of my book. It's the antipodes of the mind, the distant geography of the mind. So in that sense, ayahuasca and other things also, I talk about ayahuasca because this is what I know, but other things as well, it'll give us the opportunity to discover the hidden continents of our own mind.
Yeah, but when I read your book, I had a feeling that there was this hint to the fact that you studied this, and therefore the history of psychology, but basically the history of science, history of philosophy, had to be redrawn. Now, my question is: do you believe that people like Plato or Socrates or the Neoplatonists had psychedelic experience, yes or no, and has that influenced their thinking?
Okay, first I want to say that this book, that I'm glad you have read, is a cognitive psychological book. It's almost 500 pages, and only the last chapter deals with philosophical implications, and I've written already a lot, but I intend in the future to have a sequel to this book, which will be a philosophical and more speculative book. But you mentioned Plato. Now, I'm not an expert on Greek history, not. But I'm not the only one who thinks that in classical Greece there were the rituals, the mysteries of Eleusis, and there they used the kikaion, which was a divine drink.
Probably psychedelic drink.
And people said that when they drank it, these rituals, these festivals lasted more than 2,000 years until Christianity abolished them in the 4th century. And usually classical professors of classical Greek literature and philosophy thought that this was only a metaphor. But beginning with Wason, who was a banker, an American banker who was the first white person to have taken the mushrooms in Mexico. He was a real intellectual and also a friend of Aldous Huxley. He suggested the idea, together with some other scholars, that the kikaion of the Eleusis mysteries was not a metaphor. It was a real psychoactive drink. And they found, again, I'm not an expert on Greek culture, but I read it makes sense. They found there in the valley, because we know where it was. It's an archaeological site today. And they grow there a kind of wheat that has fungi growing on it, which has molecules very similar to LSD. So we don't have a direct proof, but it makes lots of sense to think that was used there. Now, we do know, as an historical fact, that Plato participated in you could participate only once in your lifetime. Any Greek citizen could do it, free citizen. And we know that Plato did it. And when we look at Platonian metaphysics, it makes sense.
This whole idea of the cave and that the reality we see is part of it. It's only a limited part of it.
A shadow of it. And really the main thing is the light behind. And normally people don't see this light. Now there is a last part of the cave of Plato that usually people don't mention. But at the end of the text, there is a cave and everybody sees only the shadows, and the man there is asked to step behind and look at the light. He sees the light. And then he doesn't want to go back. So they have to kick him to go back to your own world, you know. And this is usually not mentioned, but that's the end of the story, that he's kicked back because people see this light and it's so fantastic, and they have to also to know to go back. I'll tell you, there is in the Talmud, you know, in the Jewish culture, there is a very famous passage of 4 people who went into the garden. The garden means the esoteric world.
The Garden of Eden.
No, it's not garden.
The garden.
No, it's metaphorically the garden. It's not the Garden of Eden. It's playing with words in Hebrew. It's the garden of the Kabbalah, of esoteric knowledge. And these were 4 first-rate rabbis. All are historical figures. One entered and died. The second entered, and these are not little boys, these are grand figures. The second entered and became crazy. The third entered, came back, but decided he'd begin a new religion. Or maybe he became an atheist. And only one of them, that's the way it says, entered in peace and returned in peace. Because this experience is not only to enter and to have the experience, but also to know how to come back in peace and what you make out of it. I personally made the book out of it.
Okay, because what you're saying here is that entering this garden of esoteric knowledge is also what happens when you take ayahuasca. You enter a different world of knowledge, of creativity, as that's your main thesis. Getting in touch with the basic instinct of the person, creativity, taking some from the inside, projecting it into the world and acting. Yeah.
I don't want to say projecting. I want to say just it's the grace of creativity. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you experience that, then you come back in the world, and then you say there are various kinds of coming back into the world.
Yeah. For example, the most famous, I said that in Brazil, as you know, because now it's also in Holland. There are Christian churches, Brazilian churches, that it's not the Christianity of the Vatican, but it's a mixed Christianity that took ayahuasca elements and Catholic elements, also Afro-Brazilian elements together. And the most famous church of this is called Santo Daime, which also exists in Amsterdam.
You know that a lot of their ritual and the way they do it, the setting up, is like from a ship, and the songs.
No, this is Barquinha. This is another one.
Yeah, but also in their setup it is.
But I want to say
and the songs sometimes remind me of being Dutch of 17th century sailor songs.
Okay. But what I want to say is, how did it happen? A black man, half slave, who worked as a simple rubber plantation worker in the 20s and 30s in the Amazon. He met Indians, because the Indians didn't want to show this to white people. But that man was black. The Indians didn't think that he was black but Catholic, so they gave him ayahuasca. And he drank it, not the first time, but at one point for 8 consecutive days alone. This is amazing, in the forest. Eating just a bowl of, it's not rice, but something similar to rice and water. And he had a vision of, he called either the Lady of Ayahuasca or the Queen of the Forest, or he called her also the Virgin Mary, telling him to found a new religion. So he came, you asked about coming back.
He's one of those rabbis who came back and found it.
And he found it, and he was a black slave and simple worker. And he made a religion that is now in Holland, and recently it got a legal status in Spain, and it might conquer the world. So he made a religion. Another person, an Indian, may decide after this that he'll become a healer to cure people of those diseases. And I wrote a book. Yeah.
You wrote a book, but so you say the one rabbi that went there in peace and came back in peace, he was the real hero.
Yeah, and the important thing is also he entered in peace. It means that he entered when he was already prepared. Like in the Jewish tradition, you say that you cannot study Kabbalah until you are 40 years old. That you know who you are, what you're doing in life. So this rabbi, and he was prepared, he was already...
Okay. How old were you when you took your first?
42.
Okay.
And I think it was exactly the right age. I tell you why. Because I was maturing, I was old enough to know who I am, but also young enough. Today, I'm 57, it would be too difficult for me physically to go to those places. And when I did it, I was still young to go to the jungle and things like that, yeah.
Okay. But anyway, out of that, so you're one of the people that came back with a message and you wrote this book and you look at the roots of philosophy. But again, the question is, looking at the history of philosophy and what you know now, is there a great difference between your thinking or now and the Neoplatonic thinking that emerged out of the Greek culture?
Yeah, I think, first of all, there's difference because I was born in the 20th century, and people are also manifestations of their time. But you mentioned, rightly so, Neoplatonism, I think it's of the Western philosophies, it's the most similar to what one sees with ayahuasca. But of all human philosophies, I think the most similar is the Vedanta, the classical Indian, not Indian from the Amazon, but Indian from India philosophy. Now,
from the Vedic times.
Vedic times, yes. There is the Rig Veda, which is the oldest of the Vedas. And they, like in Greece, they sing of a magic drink that they drink.
It's called Soma, yes.
Soma, yeah. And they describe what they saw. And again, professors of India culture say this is a metaphor. But I read the Greek Veda only after I knew ayahuasca. It's very, very similar. And they say we drank the Soma and we met the gods. And that's not...
Okay. A piece of information, I wrote something about fire rituals and Agnihotra and the large, sometimes 11 days, 17 priests, and the rituals in the Vedic tradition. And they're in the Rig Veda and they have songs, as you said. But the interesting thing is that this ritual starts where you take the Soma and you slaughter a horse, you make an offering of a horse, but then you prepare it, you cook the Soma, and they don't know what it was now, so they cook something else. But then in the middle there's 2 days, nothing happening. Now this is for me such an indication that those priests took the Soma, and if you take like ayahuasca, you're out of order, or you're doing your dream for 2 days, but you're not able to perform other functions.
No, and it's not true. If you are a good ayahuasquero, that's the amazing thing about ayahuasca. Not like mushrooms. You perform very well in this world also.
Maybe that's the difference with Soma, but in the middle of those 11 days, there are 2 days that
are nothing. I did not know this. Thank you, but I did not know this. But a good ayahuasquero is a person that knows to function both up there and here. I give you an example. We were only 5 people, but really in the forest, deep in the virgin Amazonian forest. And the ayahuasca was very strong. And at one point, the shaman said, we have to stop because he sees that it will rain. There are thunders and there'll be a storm. We cannot remain like this in the middle of the jungle with a storm. So we were all in different places. And he let us go. We walked for 40-45 minutes to a place that was shelter from the rain, and it rained. So this is a good shaman. He's not a guru, he's not a mystic, he's a person who can function in both dimensions. Yeah.
Good. I want to clarify one thing about ayahuasca, my personal experience. I think there's 2 sides to ayahuasca. One we can call the mystical experience, where you come in close contact with the divine, the unio mystico, the oceanic felix. But there's another part, it's the magical part. Centodime and other churches, and especially the use of ayahuasca in the West, seems to center on this mystical, on this oceanic feeling,
it's
love.
It's religious.
Yeah,
Religious.
yeah,
It's very dramatic. It's not oceanic. It's really visions. It's very
No,
powerful.
I understand that.
Yeah.
But there is another use of ayahuasca, which is to prepare for hunting, prepare for war. This is not usually mentioned in ayahuasca literature. That
Because tragically, this no longer exists. You know, we have a very sad situation in the Amazon now that they cut the forest and they even kill the people, or they destroy the habitat of the people. And the Indians who lived really like hunters, they don't exist anymore. The Indians there are the poorest of the poor. They live, you know, the cheapest labor, man labor. So today the main functions of ayahuasca are again two. One that you mentioned, the religious one, but the other one is healing, is medicinal.
But have you heard stories 20 years ago about these more acting, more aggressive?
No. I know them only of the literature, of research that was done. I would say the late 40s, immediately after the Second War, the beginning of the 50s, and that's it. This kind of
Even stories where they used the ayahuasca sessions to keep the whites out in the early days of the 20th century.
Not to keep out, but whites were not involved in that. Yeah. It's sad, but that's the way. By contrast, the medicinal, folk medicine, herbal medicine use of ayahuasca is very strong today, especially not in Brazil, but in Peru. Poor people who don't have the access, the financial access to the government hospitals, to Western medicine, they go regularly to ayahuasca for healing. Yeah.
Now, we're here talking about a South African brew. South American, sorry. There is a thing in Africa, iboga, which is kind of similar, only with one difference: it's a root. It's not a vine. If you have time in your lifetime, would you be interested to research something like iboga and see the difference with ayahuasca?
Yeah, I would be. I heard about iboga, and I met. Actually, I met in Israel. The only person I met who had iboga experience was Israelis like to travel, so I met an Israeli, and I was very impressed by his stories, and maybe, yeah, who knows, one day, yeah.
Benny Shanon, looking into the antipodes of the mind, which he described as the far out geographic areas of what a thing on top of our head does for us, our mind. Thank you.
Thank you.